for joining us. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll make a start. So welcome to what is now the penultimate session of the academic year for the Learning and Teaching webinar series here at the University of Suffolk. Basically what this series is and what we've done this academic year is invite internal and external to the university, so speakers to present on the second Wednesday of the month a topic that they're passionate about around learning and teaching in higher education. My name is Phil Nicholson and I facilitate the series. So today we are joined by Dr. Pete King, who is a senior lecturer at the university, Swansea University, and he's program director for the MA in Developmental and Therapeutic Play. A vastly experienced playworker, and Pete now uses this experience in a higher education setting. His session today focuses on whether playfulness can be used in higher education and using playfulness in teaching research methods in higher education. Just as a reminder, in terms of some housekeeping, so Pete will talk for around 40 to 45 minutes, with the remaining time in the hour used for some questions and discussion. But please do type in the chat as Pete is talking and presenting, and we will come to these towards the end. So without any more delay, Pete, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Bill, and again, thanks for inviting me along. I must admit, I've not done a webinar before, so it's quite unusual just to be chatting to the screen, hoping there are people in the ether. So yeah, just to confirm, my name's Dr. Just called Pete, and just sort of having a bit of a chin wag around this aspect of playfulness and whether we can use playfulness as a method of teaching in higher education. Just a bit more about background. As Phil said, I'm senior lecturer here. I'm not in the College for Human Health Science anymore. I'm actually now in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, and I'm in the Department for Education and Childhood Studies. We had a bit of a restructure a couple of years ago. But I've been the programme manager for the MA in Developmental Therapeutic Play course since about 2013-14, but I've actually been teaching on it since it started in 2008. So that's when I was doing my PhD, and my supervisor, Dr. Justine Howard, actually set up the course, but part of my PhD was teaching on it. And then 2013, I became a full-time member of staff. Justine's still here. So we've both been involved in the course right from the onset. I teach on the Developmental Therapeutic Play course, but I also have found myself teaching a lot of modules on research methods, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level, both those types of courses. And I am still an active researcher. My field is I can use the word passion, is play and children's play. And I still do a lot of research, particularly around the area of Playwork. So that's my sort of professional academic profile, but I have been a practitioner. And I started my professional practice in Playwork in 1996. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of a warning. And I'm going to show a couple of photographs. So first one is this one. And yes, this person here with a little beard is me in 1996. And this was the first after-school club that I worked in. Technically the second. The first one was my their mother-in-law needed a member of staff during summer. I've just finished completing my PGCE secondary school science wasn't a vocation for me. Useful qualification, but I do admire those who teach in primary and secondary schools. Not for me. But these are children who were in the after-school club, and actually I think all 5 of those came every night. So they got to see me and I got to see them on a regular basis throughout the term. Interestingly, I found out that this chap is now an editor with Netflix. I'm making no bones or claims that it's down to me and coming to my club. His dad was actually a filmmaker, so I think it's sort of followed more in the family. But I'm always intrigued about how children who came to an after-school club, what their memories are. And I did a bit of research on that one. This was a couple of years later. That's me, minus the hat, and that was an after-school club project that I set up in Wokingham. It was Department for Education and Employment, the FEE as it was then, funded. And basically it was setting up a club and then using it as a demonstration club for other primary schools to see how you can have an after-school club running after the school day. Interestingly, this person, Hazel, took over from me. She was still running the club up until 2 years ago when she retired. And this chap, or was it this chap? No, it's this chap here. I went to Hazel's leaving do, and he was there, as was a couple of other of the children who were there on the first day. And then in 2013, that's when I was still practicing. I was writing up my PhD, but I was running this, what was termed an open access play project. I had a VAS, thing of Playwork, which is going to children's parks and open spaces. It's useful just to give that background, because within all these realms is the fact that it reflects Playwork from the Adventure Playgrounds when it was first set up, when Lady Eleanor Hartwood brought the idea back from Denmark to the UK, through the after-school clubs, the childcare aspect that the Labour government wanted to try and increase the workforce, so they provided funding for after-school clubs to be open. And then the movement, particularly in the late 2000s, where mobile Playwork provision came in, and that was where the Purple Roots that I was the coordinator with. And I think what joins all these different aspects of Playwork, and again the brief history of my professional practice, is that this thing about playful characteristics help make up Playwork's uniqueness. That's what many people who work in the Playwork field. This is Penny Wilson, who's been around for many, many years. No empirical evidence. No one has actually done any kind of empirical research to say all play workers or most play workers are playful. But there is this sort of playful element to our job that we have, and it reflects, and I think for me it's reflected from my first after school club in 1996 right through to running a more open access provision. The concept of open access provision, children come and go as you please, whereas after school clubs, children are collected and signed in. But it's this aspect of being playful and playfulness that's always intrigued me. In 2016, I decided that I wanted to do my HEA fellowship, and you have to come up with some sort of aspect of sort of your philosophical approach to teaching and learning. And I know this is a bit convoluted, and I do apologise for I tell my students, don't put too long words in, you don't need to, and I've just done the same thing here. However, the key aspect here is being this playful constructivist, but also this concept about a relaxed environment. And I'll come back to that. So I put this in my HEA application. And also I did a little bit of sort of background research as I was doing this HEA application and as a subsequent study. And I found this lovely quote from Tanis. And they also make reference to this concept, a safe environment, as opposed to a relaxed environment. But the first fact about a relaxed environment is that you feel safe. And it's when we don't feel safe that the environment doesn't feel relaxed. And Lieberman, doing a study of post-adolescence, playfulness in learning, the subject matter and the personality of the teacher influence the student's manifestation of playfulness. So it's this communication between us generally standing at the front and the students sitting in front of us, but actually what is mirroring back to the students? How are we as lecturers? And you know, I found in my professional practice that children instantly migrate to those people they feel comfortable with, and often it's those people with that playful characteristic. And I'm not saying students are the same thing, but you can pick out this aspect of people who you feel are quite playful. And when I talk about playful, I'm not talking about standing in front and making joke after joke after joke after joke. It's not a comedy routine. We're not a comedy store. But it is about trying to engage and developing this safe environment, this relaxed environment. So what do we mean by playfulness? Well, going back to Lieberman, it talks about an individual personality trait. So something that inherent is part of our makeup. And Barnett did a quantitative study with American undergraduate students, and there was these 4 elements that they deemed sort of made up a playful personality: gregarious, uninhibited, comedic, and dynamic. Now, I don't confess to be any of those 4. Certainly, my children will vouch that I'm definitely not comedic. But this was sort of an aspect that these the playful characteristics that undergraduate students sort of perceive to make up an aspect of your playful personality. So we've got this individual personality trait. The second aspect is what we can term disposition, the way we approach situations and activities. And John Dewey, the educationalist, stated that playfulness is an attitude of the mind. And just quickly reflecting back, I was at a conference last week, and flying back from Glasgow, I was in the department lounge and pinged up that my flight was cancelled. Suddenly, I was not felt in a safe environment. I was not what I felt was in a relaxed environment. In fact, it was quite stressful. And I could feel that any aspect of playfulness disappeared from me. And my approach was definitely not playful in trying to respond as opposed to react to the situation. The last aspect that we consider around playfulness is this thing called creativity. And Pryor did a study with this, and playful people seem to be aware of their potential for creative and new production. And this maybe reflects when I was doing my PGCE. My first degree is actually in botany, some sort of science degree. And I decided to try and go into secondary school education as a science teacher. And I always remember being at one school for my placement, and they had these range of books, activity books and everything else. And what I was told was, right, when you do your lecture, just choose the worksheet that fits from the book. And being a little bit, I think the term has been thrown my way, bloody minded, I thought, I'm not doing that, because one, I'm not going to get anything out of it. And if I don't get anything out of it, then I'm pretty sure the children don't. So I decided to create my own, if I was going to do a worksheet, but I made them interactive, not just writing down and filling in boxes. And again, this has enabled me to reflect back that these three aspects are actually quite useful to use when we consider playfulness, and if we're going to try and use playfulness in our teaching. So that raises the question, can playfulness be used in higher education? Higher education is predominantly adults aged 18 upwards. There's no barrier at the top end, which is quite rightly so. I always say to my children and my students, education never goes away. It should never, it should always be there when you're ready to engage. But sort of, I'm not using the word play, because play is used in play-based learning, and that's a different webinar and everything else. But this aspect of playfulness, does it get lost as education moves from primary to secondary to tertiary and so forth? And it's only recent sort of few years that I've really sort of been unpacking playfulness a lot more. But can it be used in higher education? Going back to this concept of a relaxed field, it comes from Gordon Burkhart, who is an animal behaviourist. And basically, he says that if an animal is adequately fed, has that health and free from stress, in other words, the animal is in a relaxed field. Now, although many of us who either have been in a teaching or learning environment as a student or as a member of staff, those first entries into the lecture room can make a big difference from, you know, the beginning of a module to the end. I'm not going to go into the realms of it. I'm pretty much, I like Gibson's concept of affordances. And it's not just the physical affordances of the room, it's the social affordances and the emotional affordances and everything else. And what I've often found, particularly with research modules, is that there's more of a sort of sense of stress, because any word research actually can put up potential barriers, anxiety from the onset. And often, particularly teaching research at master's level, at postgraduate level, I ask students, you know, what's your experience in research? And I get literally nothing. It's the first time they've come across it. To some who are actually still doing research. But then, like anything, is, well, what knowledge and experience and what have you been taught before? And I'm not saying one's better than the other, obviously not, but there are different ways and approaches to teaching research. And so this aspect of some sort of state of stress, if people are in stress or anxiety, they're not going to be in a relaxed field. And I think the teaching environment, like any other environment, is no different. Is that you want to be able to do it where there's a more relaxed field, a more sort of a stress-reduced environment as you can get. And I just thought, well, how can, with research, how can you try and start and create that relaxed field? And what I used to do, well, I still do, but a slightly different way, and I'll explain why, is the first research methods section, I would literally just have these resources: an egg, some straws, and some tape. Now, pre-COVID, I would get the students in, introduce myself, and then just put them in a group, get them to introduce themselves in the group, and then set them a task. And the task is simply create a structure with the straws and the tape to hold the egg, and then we'll see if we can get the egg to survive a drop. And it was really good because when we was in the lecture room, people would get to chatting to each other. We go outside, we drop it, and I just thought it helped create that sort of, right, we're starting to relax the field a little bit here. They don't know why they're doing it, because I don't tell them. And I'll explain why I don't tell them in a moment. Then we had COVID and social distancing and everything else. We weren't even allowed on campus. And what we decided was that we would still run the courses, but I would still do live lectures. And I would do live lectures from my kitchen. And so what I did was, instead of the students doing this as a group, they would do it individually at home. And when we then had the first Zoom lecture, I get the students to just hold up what contraption they made, and then I'd send them out, and then they come back and they'll tell me if the egg survived or not. And that seemed to work as well. It didn't mean that it had to be a group thing. People could do it individually. Again, wouldn't tell the students why I was doing this. And so when we came back onto campus now, I thought, right, rather than doing this as a group thing, it'd be quite nice if students do it as a pre-lecture task. So I just send out a pre-recorded video of what they have to do. Again, don't tell them why. And then I say, right, can you send me, before the first lecture, a photograph of your contraption? And these are the ones that people made this year. And what I particularly like is the person who actually gave me one with a smiley face, which tells me that their disposition is quite happy. Again, they don't know why. And it's only when I go through the different structures, so we've got some that are similar, some with a little bit of variation, that I suddenly then say to them, what, how does this relate to research? And the basis premise of this is that it's actually introducing students to the research process, because they're all being asked to do the same thing, so the same possible research question or potentially an area of investigation. And I said, what you've done is that you've all slightly approached it and constructed something a little bit different. Hence, we can have quite a different design, research design, that is still trying to relate to the same research question. The key thing, though, is that you want your research design to be robust. So the metaphor extends to the egg being data. And that if your design is robust, once you drop it, if your egg's intact, then your data is intact. If your design's not rigorous and you end up with a smashed egg, then your data is probably worthless. So it's using the sort of power of metaphor. You can also expand it into aspects of reliability and validity. Were all the tape the same size? Were all the eggs the same shape? Did they all weigh the same? Were they dropped from the same height? It gives other aspects that I can revert back at later lectures. So when I talk about reliability and validity, I can make reference again to the students constructing and making the egg. And I just find it as a very, very useful, playful introduction into research, to then just go through the research process, and then we unpack the research process as we go on. So that's sort of the first lecture, just focuses on this. And then as we go through, I do the same approach where I feel I'm going to introduce a playful task. I won't tell the students why they're doing it until they've done it. And then when we unpack what they've done, then I make the links to the research. So for example, I tell the students that doing some research, I found the most common way that lecturers like to unwind. And I just open it out as a question. I say, what do you think it will be? And the usual answers, we get drunk when we want to unwind as lecturers. And I tactfully say, no, that wasn't in the research. I think getting drunk was number 7. And so I wait until I get the response I'm looking for. And the response I'm looking for is watch TV. And I go, yeah, it is watch the TV, but it's watching a specific program or a specific type of program, a type of genre. And so again, it throws the question out. And eventually I get watching quiz shows. And I say, this is the research I found, that university lecturers, where they want to unwind, the way they unwind is to watch quiz shows. And then again, throwing it out, does anybody watch quiz shows? And admittingly that it is a UK-based answer, so I have to unpack for our international students who aren't familiar with daytime quiz shows, saying that a lot of our UK students weren't familiar with the UK quiz shows. So I asked the students what do they watch. So I get The Chase. I said, explain The Chase to me, or explain The Chase to anybody who's in the room not doing it. But the one answer I'm looking for is the quiz show that is on the same time as The Chase, but on another channel, which is Pointless. I said, tell me about Pointless. So those who aren't familiar with Pointless, it's a quiz show. They ask 100 people outside of the studio a question, and then they have contestants, and they're given the question, and they got to think of an answer that none of the 100 people have asked. So you're looking for that pointless answer. So I build this up, and then basically I say, let's have a game of pointless research. Let's have a game where can you come up in 100 seconds, write down as many things as you can about the world we live in. So I time them. I say, just bullet point anything about the world that we live in. And then we're looking for, has anybody got a pointless fact? So once we've done the 100 seconds, I say, right, what have you got? So people shout out things like the world is round, and then you get the debate that it's actually an ellipse, but it's, round of ellipse. It's basically got quite a standard shape, per se. It's 80% water. We need oxygen to breathe. So all these things that come out. And then somebody might say, all people believe in God. And it's like, well, do all people believe in God? Or other aspects around people speak different languages. There are variations in that. And we, more often than not, we might get a pointless fact, but more often than not, people have written down the same things, particularly those objective facts, those things that we learned through science in our school days and everything else. Whereas the other aspect, the more subjective, tend to get less of a response or an answer, but they tend to be the ones that fall within the sort of pointless fact no one else has. And basically what I'm trying to get the students introduced to are the different research paradigms. It's using this sort of playful approach of based on a quiz game that you can watch at 5:15, I believe it's 5:15 on a weekday night. But it's getting them to think, right, well, actually, there are facts about the Earth that we don't generally dispute. So, for example, I give them the example that if I came round to their house while they're having their tea and I jumped on the table and jumped off, what would happen? They say, well, you could fall down, but gravity. And so it doesn't matter whose table I'm at, the students while they're having breakfast, the same thing will happen is I'll jump off and I'll fall down. However, if I was to say to them, what would you think if I came round your house and jumped off the table? I'd get many different responses. Some would think I'll just ignore you. Other people would say I'd get a restraining order on you. The basis with that is that you've got your subjective, which has many different perspectives, and you've got your objective, your sort of quantitative and your qualitative. So it's just using that playful approach, which actually is starting to introduce quite complex aspects of research. We don't go into great depths with paradigms, but it's important that they get a basis of this aspect of subjectivity and objectivity, and then how that relates to research. And simply using the aspect of the quiz. I do then tell the students that I hadn't found any research, and probably we do all get drunk. So I don't drink, so I can't speak on myself and everyone else. But and also, yeah, it does give me an insight on students' perceptions of lecturing staff. So that's sort of another playful use of introducing research to my students. A third example is at the beginning of when we just focus on qualitative research. I give them a big build-up. I tell them, you know, they're at level 7, one level just below level 8, starting a PhD. That, you know, their critical thinking, their critical analysis. You know, this is what we're shaping and developing, and that I want to try and demonstrate this. And so I asked if 2 people could volunteer, and I generally do get 2 people. So they come to the front of the lecture room. I have a table set out, and you know, I put in my safety checks, you know, check they're comfortable to do this very technical thinking task to demonstrate their level 7 awareness of research and developing their research, and they generally say yes. And then I get them to have a game of Guess Who. And again, for those in the rest of the lecture who are not familiar about it, we explain how Guess Who is played. And also, as before, I don't tell the students why we're doing this. I do this at the beginning of the lecture, and then they play a game of Guess Who. Interestingly, the person who won it this year and the 2 who came up still tell me about how pleased they were that they won Guess Who in the lecture. So obviously they got a lot more out of it than I anticipated. And then once the game's over, forget about it. I say, right, let's get on with the lecture now. But basically what I've done is just set the seed in relation to when we're starting thinking about collecting qualitative data, particularly using interviews. And part of their assessment is they have to carry out a 10-minute interview in one part of the assignment. And it just basically introduces them to the concept of closed and open questioning, and the importance of if you're just doing an interview and you've got closed questions, all you're doing is playing Guess Who. But it also shows that actually Guess Who relies on closed questioning, because if they did one open-ended question, Guess Who will be over in seconds. Describe your character to me. Well, my character has got earrings, they're sort of pursing their lips, they've got black hair. Straight away, you know it's Anne. So Guess Who is rubbish for open questions. It's a closed question game. But again, it's just introducing that at the beginning of the lecture. I think just also helps just maintain that relaxed field, that safe environment. I've been using playfulness in my research methods for many years. And a few years ago, we get student evaluation, but it only tells you about, you know, standard things about the module. It doesn't give us any useful information about our teaching approach and whether using a playful approach actually enables students to understand elements of research. Does it help with their assignment? And so I went through our ethics and everything else, and I decided to do actually some evaluation on me using both playful and more sort of non-playful traditional aspects of research and teaching research. And I defined playfulness in relation to what I was doing in the lectures, is that there was no clue or indication on how the task, the playful task, or indeed the non-playful task, is related to research. It's the element of surprise or unpredictability. And prior to the task, a playful scenario may be provided. So, for example, how do lecturers unwind, setting up this sort of big grandiose, you're all level 7 students, so let's have a game of Guess Who. And these were the playful tasks. So the egg drop I've explained, the pointless I've explained. The throwing one is I get students to, and they do this at home as well as a pre-lecture task, is they have to get 5 socks, a bowl, and throw the socks in with their writing hand, write down the number, and then non-writing hand. And what's good about that is that it actually gives me data to talk about quantitative research designs, pre and post test things, and variables. But it's the throwing, actually doing it and not knowing why they're doing it again makes it a playful one. And prior to I used to put a quiz in, and basically just gave me a bit of a formative assessment. And then I've got the more non-playful tasks, so undertaking a literature review, doing a critique, doing an observational task, and a questionnaire design. So I didn't introduce any playful element there. It was just pretty like, this is the task you've got to do individually or in your group. So I've got these 4 playful, 4 non-playful tasks. So how were they useful in teaching and learning? I basically just had these 5 elements, 5 questions, and they had to score 1 to 6. So 1 obviously didn't understand it, 6 they did understand it. I know it's ordinal, and there are, I'm not going to give a research lecture here, but using ordinal data in relation to doing statistical tests, there are pros and cons for it. I went for the pros, and so when they did each of these for the playful and non-playful, it gave me some quantitative data to do some comparison. And this is what I found, that for the playful task as a group and the non-playful task as a group, they didn't really know what the task related to research before the task was undertaken, but they did more so for the non-playful. And that makes sense, because it's a little bit more, the links can be made. But there was a statistical difference before the task of knowing how the task related to research. However, after the task, there was no significant difference. So they could see how doing the playful or non-playful task related to the element of research. What I was particularly interested in is the score before and after. And the jump for the playful task was much bigger before to the after. Even though there's no difference and after, that's fine. Before there was. And it's part of me thinking, well, will they remember what they did and how it relates to research? Because you had that unpredictability. Like not knowing why they're doing this and still not knowing it, but knowing now, whereas more people had an idea what it was about before and after. There was no difference between matching the research topic, enjoying the task. So there wasn't any preference for people to enjoy playful to non-playful. But help for the assignment, there was slightly less using the playful to the non-playful, which tells me you can't just use the playful approach. You've got to have that mix and that balance between the two. I looked at the playful task in a little bit more detail and understanding of the before, the after, the matching topic. There was no difference between them. There was a difference between enjoying and less enjoyed the pointless game compared to the others, but they did find it helped for the assignments. So even though more so for the non-playful, actually they still found it helpful, but there was a difference. And I think it related a lot of this to the assignment at the time. The assignment at the time was a research proposal. I'm doing it on a different module now, and the assignment's slightly different. But it was useful feedback for me, knowing that which of these elements students found more useful to their assignments when I was doing it subsequently. So it gave me some really useful analysis to say, well, actually, I'm quite comfortable keep using this playfulness, but it can't be just playfulness on its own. There's got to be those non-playful tasks. And I give students a copy of the paper when I finish the module, just to show them that, you know, the approach has been looked at. And I always remember one person went to the straight to the discussion, and in the discussion, I put down not all students like playful or playfulness in their, and they said to me, I'm glad you put that down because I didn't enjoy it. And I just thought that's a fair comment. But then it also demonstrates, well, there's those who may not have enjoyed the more non-playful task, you know, so there's a balance. So having a mixture of the two enables that you're doing some kind of learning and teaching and that will try and meet the majority of the room, but you're not going to please everybody. That's just life. You don't need me in a webinar to tell you that. So why use playfulness? Well, it's these three aspects: individual personality trait, disposition, creativity. I think it does create this relaxed field, particularly when you introduce it on the start, but keep have a playful aspect. I'm not saying every lecture, but more than one lecture. It reminds, I think, the students that they are in this learning environment, but it can be in a relaxed, you know, when I do the Guess Who game right at the beginning, you can just sense that people do get into watching it, people, you know, and then when I make the links, they, you know, yeah, right, I can see why Pete's done this. They can guess that I'm up to something. They know me by now. But I think it's trying to keep this relaxed field. And you need to have a mixture of playful and non-playful tasks. I think there's the balance there that needs to be maintained throughout the module. So going back to the question, can playfulness be used in higher? Yes, it can. I probably could have just said yes right at the beginning, but then what would we have done for 45 minutes, apart from have a game of Guess Who, or I would get you to go and get an egg, some straws and some tape. These are a couple of books that myself and my colleague, Dr. Shelley Newstead, have edited. And the first one are all play workers who have now undertaken a PhD and done some research. The second one is a mixture of play workers and non-play workers, but using what we've termed a play work approach, researching play from a play work approach. And what is this play work approach? Well, when we looked at the chapters in the first book and then used it as the basis for the second, there seems to be these four elements that as play workers from our practice, we're still using in our research. Lo and behold, shock and horror, playfulness appeared. The way that we developed our research design, the way we collected the data. Many have used quite playful approaches. One person dressed up as a detective and set out a sort of mystery task, but it was their way of collecting data. I've used playfulness as well. So I think this thing about using playfulness in higher education. From my perspective, as a Playwork practitioner to a researcher and lecturer, I can see where this thread of playfulness goes all the way through. I think that is me dead on 45 minutes, Phil. So thank you very much for those who are out there in the ether and I can't see you for listening. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to try and respond to them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pete, for that really interesting and very playful presentation. Some really nice examples in there. If you do have any questions for Pete, please do send them in or fire them in. We've got about 15 minutes before we conclude the webinar. I'm going to start with a question from Christian. So thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, Christian. He says, at the University of Suffolk, we are teaching using the block format, which is where modules are condensed into 5 weeks instead of 12, but we focus on one module at a time, Pete. But basically, Christian says we need to deliver a research methods module to level 5 undergraduate in 4 weeks. Do you think a playfulness approach would be more or less feasible in this context?
The answer is I think you can use a playful approach for any subject. It's not just for research, but I've just used that as an example because I use the same playful approach when I'm teaching my other modules. Yes, I think you can do it, but again, I think it's the importance of having that balance and ensuring that if in relation to research, students come away after doing the playful task, making that link, or at least knowing that there is a link to research, and not just, when I used to do the group task with the egg drop, people used to think it was a team building exercise because it's often used in that context. And so it was important that you unpack it, that they realise that, well, yeah, you can use it in that context, but I'm using it in this context. A lot of the examples that I use at postgraduate level, I also use at undergraduate level. So the pointless, in any introduction to paradigms, I think the game of pointless is just a really nice, easy example to use. And it's the same with the game of Guess Who, just to get people to think about. It's just obviously, as you unpack it, then you go into more depth in relation to what level you're doing, undergraduate and postgraduate. But to answer the question, yeah, I think you can do that. I think that's feasible.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your question, Christian. I've got a couple of questions, Pete. I think, the results that you have just brought up there, in particular, the no difference between enjoyments, did that surprise you at all? Did that surprise me? I suppose it did in a way, but then thinking about the other way is that if they enjoyed the non-playful just as much as the playful, then you're on a bit of a win-win in a way, because they were quite high scores. If it was both low scores, then I think, well, I haven't got a problem just on the playful, I've got a problem on the non-playful as well. So it is, but then again, I think the other thing, Phil, is that when you're in the lecture room, you can gauge the people who are into the playful compared to the non-playful. People's body language give it away, the way they respond, this thing about disposition. You can see those who are students who are playful, how they approach it in a playful disposition, and the ones that you just think feel quite uncomfortable. And I think that's the important thing. Not everybody is comfortable with playfulness. And I wouldn't want to do it completely like that, because you'd lose a section of your students. So actually having that more non-playful task is potentially creating that relaxed field for them, because actually the playfulness might not be, particularly for students who don't like group interaction. And we have quite a sort of range of students on what they're comfortable and not comfortable with. So some of it, you gauge it as you go along, and that's part of us being reflective practitioners. We should always be reflecting in action and on action.
And so I can get a gauge each year in the fact that I think probably more students are into the non-playful than the playful than compared to the year before.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I think it's almost, I feel like particularly the colleagues that I chat with, there's a motivation to be more playful in the teaching and learning that we facilitate and that we do, but it's perhaps almost understanding and maybe being a bit wary of how it would go down with some of those students. Is that something that you hear quite a lot?
I don't, to be honest with you. It's more about I get a gauge with how the students are responding, and how sometimes they have to sort of get used to that teaching style as well. And as I say, it's not for everyone. But you know, saying that, I mean, what I will share is I finished my teaching for this semester, and one of the students sent me a really nice thank you card. And the one thing they said was, it's not easy to keep a group of adults engaged for a long period of time, but you managed to do it. And for me, that's reflecting on, is because I think I use a playful approach. Because if I just use the non-playful didactic approach, I wouldn't be engaged. And if I'm not engaged, I don't think the students will be. So I think it's this thing that we create together. And I mean, if you want to sort of go into the realms of potential, what it's about, is that if you go into one of the characteristics of playfulness is creativity. And if you go into the writings of Donald Winnicott, he did this wonderful book called Playing a Reality. And what he talks about is that we have this subjective inner world, and we have an objective outer world. And there's a crossover in between, what he calls the potential space or third area. And I think that's what the classroom environment is. It's a potential learning space, but it's going to be a learning space that has both those lecturing and those students on the other end of it, but we create something together. And for me, it's that playfulness that helps me make that connection between what I'm trying to do, what they're trying to learn, and how I'm trying to deliver it. And playfulness enables creativity.
That's really interesting. But yeah, I guess it's that idea, and what I'm picking up from this is that gauging, almost reading the room, I imagine, is really important. Just to clarify, more so from, I guess, my own understanding more than anything, but is it the not knowing element that you consider to be the playful element, in terms of almost maybe at the start of the students why they're doing a particular thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's you know, the whole aspect of playfulness is having that element of surprise, of not knowing. And I think if I was to say, right, we're going to do a game of Guess Who because it's going to illustrate open and closed questioning, I'd lose the students straight away. They think, oh, well, we told us what you're doing it for, then why are we bothering? Unlike, you know, if I was to say, right, when you're doing a literature review, it's important that you know what your topic is, you know what you then looking to research and everything. I'm telling them what they're doing, why they're related to it. So there's no element of surprise there, Phil. Whereas the other aspect is like, right, we're doing this, but I don't want you to know why we're doing it. As I say, when it gets to sort of, as the weeks go on, whenever I set something, straight away, there's the inkling of, right, he's up to something. What's he up to? But they still can't make the connection. But for me, that's good, because it means that they've got into that sort of playful learning aspect, that environment that we've created together, but they still haven't worked out what it is, because it's that element of surprise. So yes, I think for me, that's quite, and that's where I think that big jump between the playful, not knowing the task, to knowing it after the task is big, is quite a crucial jump, because I think that's where they run. I get students who've done the module years ago, sometimes I bump into them. One of the first things they always say to me is, oh, I remember you getting us doing that egg task. you know, they remember what they did in that playful position. What I don't do is I don't say, oh, well, how does it relate to the research process? Because they finished the course. I think it would be a bit unfair if I start grilling them again. But the fact that they remember it tells me, well, they're going to make that connection more than if they're trying to struggle to remember what they did.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Question from Iwana. So do you feel as if, you know, you talk about the stress and the relaxed feel. Do you feel that the pandemic has made that relaxed field harder to achieve?
When we came back, yes, because we were in bubbles of 6 students in very big, vast lecture rooms. I wasn't allowed to go beyond the front of the lecture room unless I had a particular reason. We couldn't do group work, part of in the bubbles. I actually think when we came back this year, and we're pretty much back to pre-COVID, there's no restriction on everything else. I actually found that the room was more relaxed from the onset because people were relieved to be back in a social situation where they didn't have to worry if they had their mask or not. Saying that though, it's about the topic and the word research. And I had nearly 60 people in my research module this year, you know, and you could just sense when students are coming in, you know, when I asked that first question, who's done research and everything else, you know, you can feel, you know, those people, you know, there's a bit of reassurance when somebody thinks, oh, I haven't done it, and there's someone over there who hasn't done it, so at least I'm not on my own. But then that's where I think it's important to write, okay, let's get this relaxed field, hopefully a little bit more at a lower level, that you know, and then it's right, you did this task. So I don't think the pandemic is going to change per se, but what I would say is I think students were grateful to being back in social situations with a lack of restrictions.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I think in terms of, you know, students with the stresses of daily lives on top of studying as well, some of them have really got a lot on their plate, and maybe almost whether that can have an impact as well in terms of whether they're receptive to maybe activities that perhaps don't immediately acquaint themselves to particular areas of a module or learning outcomes. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, and I think again, it goes back down to whether you do a playful or non-playful. As a lecturer, we've got to make sure, you know, that the connections are being made before they left the lecture room and not being left to their own devices.
Yeah.
But that goes with anything, Phil. That's just our basic of, you know, if we've got in with a learning outcome, can we ensure that we've actually met that learning outcome for the student?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Pete, thank you so much. That was such a, well, it was a fantastic, it was really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you for your time this afternoon. It's nearly 5 o'clock, so we'll sign off there. But before we do, I'd just like to make you aware of the last session, which takes place on the 12th of July. We'll have Chris Huggins from the University of Suffolk and Patrick Biejmans from Maastricht University in the Netherlands. So please keep an eye out for correspondence and advertising of that session. I'd like to say thank you to Pete again, and also thank you to everybody who's attended. Have a lovely rest of the day and enjoy the